Staff Sergeant Maddox slammed his fist against the observation table, his face twisted with rage as he glared at the roster sheet in front of him. "You've got to be kidding me. They sent us a woman." He spat the word like poison, his voice carrying across the Arizona training ground where 12 other elite snipers had gathered. "What is this, some kind of diversity stunt? We're trying to break records here, not babysit." His weathered hands crumpled the paper as Senior Chief Grant Rowe stood beside him, arms crossed, saying nothing but nodding slowly in agreement. The other men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes following Maddox's pointed finger toward a figure standing alone near the equipment tent, small, quiet, unassuming. Petty Officer Riley Voss. Before we continue, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and stick with me until the very end of this story. Drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this incredible tale travels. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, turning the sand into waves of shimmering heat that distorted everything beyond 50 meters. Maddox turned away from the roster and strode toward the firing line where the other snipers had already set up their positions. These weren't rookies. These were men who'd earned their places through blood and bullets in Fallujah, Kandahar, and a dozen other hellholes most Americans couldn't find on a map. Men who'd taken shots that would make Hollywood scriptwriters weep with disbelief. "Listen up," Maddox's voice boomed across the range. "We've got 13 attempts to hit a target at 3,600 meters. 3,600. That's over 2 miles of desert wind heat distortion and pure chaos between us and that steel. Command wants to see if it's even possible before they invest in new equipment." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled snipers. "So let's show them what real operators can do, not what some Pentagon desk jockey thinks we can do." The first shooter was Gunnery Sergeant Chen, a compact man with hands so steady, they'd once held a scope on target for 6 hours straight during a mission in Ramadi. He settled behind the Barrett EM-82, his breathing slowing to the rhythm he'd perfected over 15 years. The spotter beside him called out calculations in a monotone that suggested they'd done this dance 1,000 times. Wind 4.2 miles per hour quartering from the right. Humidity 62%. Temperature 104 and climbing. Elevation adjustment 43.6 MOA. Chen squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the empty desert like thunder. Everyone waited, binoculars raised, watching the distant hillside where the target stood. Nothing. No impact marker. No hit. Again, Maddox ordered, his jaw tight. Chen fired twice more. Both rounds went wide, disappearing into the Arizona wasteland like they'd never existed at all. Next shooter, Lieutenant Barnes took position. He'd made impossible shots in Afghanistan, taking out enemy combatants from positions that defied logic. He was methodical, patient, legendary for his ability to read wind patterns that others couldn't even see. He fired 4 times, not a single hit registered. By the time the 6th sniper failed his 3rd attempt, the mood on the range had shifted from confident determination to frustrated bewilderment. These men had spent their entire adult lives mastering their craft. They'd calculated, for every variable their experience had taught them, to expect the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, the way heat rising off sand created invisible currents that grabbed bullets and threw them off course. The way wind at the firing line meant nothing compared to wind at 1,000 meters, 1,500, 2,000. Maddox watched each failure with increasing agitation, his fingers drumming against his thigh in a rhythm that betrayed his growing anger. When the 9th sniper missed his final shot, Maddox exploded. "This is unacceptable. We're supposed to be the best, and we can't hit a stationary target." His voice cracked with fury. "What are we going to tell command? That the mission's impossible? That we're not good enough?" Senior Chief Rowe finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone listen. "The conditions are extreme, Maddox. This isn't a failure of skill. It's a failure of understanding. We're pushing beyond documented capabilities here." "That's exactly the point," Maddox shot back. "We're supposed to establish new capabilities, not whine about how hard it is." The argument might have continued, but Riley Voss chose that moment to approach the firing line. She'd been standing in the background for hours watching, calculating, saying nothing. Her presence had been like a ghost at a funeral, acknowledged by everyone, welcomed by no one. "I'd like to attempt the shot," she said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright contempt. Maddox's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that suggested imminent cardiac arrest. You, the word dripped with scorn. You want to try, sweetheart? Did you not just watch 13 expert marksmen fail at this, men with more combat experience than you have days in service? Riley's expression didn't change. Yes, Staff Sergeant, I watched very carefully. Maddox laughed a sharp bark of derision that was picked up by several other snipers. Oh, this is rich. This is absolutely perfect. The diversity hire thinks she's going to show us how it's done. He turned to Rowe. Chief, tell me you're not actually considering this. Rowe studied Riley for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. What's your background, petty officer? My record is classified, Senior Chief. Classified, Maddox repeated mockingly. Of course it is. Let me guess, you're some kind of secret super soldier. Maybe you've got magic bullets that bend around corners. The other snipers chuckled, the sound ugly in the desert heat. I'm a qualified sniper staff sergeant. That's all that matters for this exercise. Qualified, Maddox sneered. I've got qualifications older than you are, little girl. I've made shots that would make your hair stand on end. I've operated in conditions that would send you running back into whatever administrative office they pulled you from. Riley's jaw tightened fractionally, the only outward sign that his words had any effect. Then you should have no objection to me trying. Oh, I object plenty, Maddox shot back. I object to wasting ammunition on someone who's clearly out of her depth. I object to turning this professional exercise into a circus act. I object to— Let her shoot, Rowe interrupted. Maddox spun toward him. Chief, you can't be serious. We're out of shooters, Maddox. Everyone's exhausted their attempts. What's one more round going to hurt? Rowe's tone suggested the matter was settled, but his eyes held something else, curiosity perhaps, or maybe just the exhaustion of dealing with Maddox's attitude all day. Maddox's hands clenched into fists. Fine, let the girl embarrass herself. Maybe it'll teach her some humility. He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, gesturing toward the rifle. Be my guest, petty officer. Show us all how it's done. Riley approached the firing position with measured steps, her boots leaving shallow prints in the sand. The Barrett M82 lay waiting, still warm from the previous shooter. She knelt beside it, her movements economical and precise, and began her own assessment of the weapon. You're going to want to adjust your scope, Maddox called out, unable to help himself. The previous shooter had it set for his eye relief. Riley said nothing. Her hands moved over the rifle with the familiarity of someone who'd spent thousands of hours with the weapon, checking the bore, testing the bipod's stability, examining the scope mounts with fingertips that could detect the slightest looseness. Lieutenant Barnes, who'd been one of the failed shooters, leaned toward Gunnery Sergeant Chen. Think she'll even hit the hillside, he murmured. Chen shrugged. Probably not, but at least it'll be entertaining. Riley settled into position behind the rifle, her body aligning with the weapon in a way that looked almost rehearsed. She pressed her cheek against the stock, her breathing slowing immediately to a rhythm that suggested deep familiarity with this particular dance. You're going to need a spotter, Maddox announced. Or are you planning to just guess at the calculations? I'll spot for myself, Riley replied, her voice muffled against the rifle. This provoked another round of laughter. She'll spot for herself, Maddox repeated to the group. Hear that? We've been doing it wrong all these years, boys. Who needs a spotter when you've got wishful thinking? Riley ignored him. Through her scope, she could see the target, a steel plate, barely visible as a speck against the distant hillside. The rangefinder built into her scope confirmed the distance, 3,617 meters. She made a mental note of the extra 17 meters. Every centimeter mattered at this range. Her mind began the calculations automatically, a process so ingrained that it felt like breathing. Wind speed at the firing line was meaningless. She needed to read the wind across the entire flight path. She watched the heat shimmer the way it danced and twisted, telling stories about air currents that most people couldn't even see. She noted the angle of the sun, the time of day, the way shadows fell across the desert floor. But more than that, she remembered. She remembered her father, Sergeant Major David Voss, kneeling beside her in the Montana wilderness when she was 12 years old. His voice came back to her across the years, calm and patient. Riley, emotion will kill you in this job. You can't afford to feel when you are behind a scope. You trust the math, you trust the physics, you trust the process. She remembered Captain Aidan Hale, her mentor at her first duty station, the man who'd seen something in her that others had missed. He'd pushed her harder than anyone else, refused to accept anything less than perfection, and in doing so had transformed her from merely competent to exceptional. The rifle doesn't care about your feelings, he'd told her during a particularly brutal training session. The bullet doesn't care if you're tired or frustrated or scared. It follows the laws of physics with absolute consistency. Your job is to understand those laws better than anyone else alive. Captain Hale was dead now, killed in an operation that remained classified even to her. But his lessons lived on, carved into her muscle memory and burned into her consciousness. "Any day now," Maddox called out. "Or are you waiting for the wind to stop?" Riley's breathing had slowed to 4 breaths per minute. Her heart rate had dropped to 52 beats per minute, a state of physiological calm that she could achieve almost at will now after years of training. She made microscopic adjustments to the scope, calculating in her head. Distance 3,617 meters. That meant a bullet drop of approximately 942 inches, accounting for the .50B mg rounds ballistic coefficient. Wind she'd observed gusts ranging from 3 to 7 miles per hour, but the prevailing current was 5.1 miles per hour quartering from the right. That translated to a windage adjustment of... She ran the numbers through the formula her father had taught her, the one that accounted for wind gradient across altitude. But there was something else, something the other shooters had missed. The time of day mattered. It was 3:14 in the afternoon, which meant the sun was beginning its descent, changing the heating patterns across the desert floor. The air at 1,500 meters would be cooler than the air at ground level, creating a temperature gradient that would affect the bullet's trajectory in ways the standard ballistic calculator didn't account for. She made another adjustment, trusting instinct honed through 10,000 hours of practice. "This is painful to watch," Barnes muttered. "How long is she going to take?" "As long as she needs," Rowe replied, surprising everyone. "If she's going to miss, let her miss on her own terms." Riley's finger found the trigger, applying pressure so gradually that it was impossible to say exactly when the rifle would fire. This was the art within the science, knowing that anticipation was the enemy of accuracy, that flinching at the expected recoil would throw off everything, that the shot had to surprise even the shooter. The Barrett roared its massive report, echoing across the desert like the voice of an angry god. The recoil pushed back against Riley's shoulder with familiar force, but she rode it perfectly, her body absorbing the impact while her eye remained pressed to the scope tracking. The bullet crossed the first 1,000 meters in just over a second. At 1,500 meters, it began to slow, the air resistance working against it. At 2,000 meters, gravity and wind had pushed it several feet off its initial trajectory, but Riley's calculations had accounted for this. At 3,000 meters, the bullet was traveling at roughly half its initial velocity, dropping fast, pushed by wind currents that were invisible but measurable. Riley counted in her head, timing the flight based on calculations she'd made before pulling the trigger. 5 seconds. 6. 7. At 8.4 seconds, the distant steel target erupted in a small cloud of dust and paint, the impact clearly visible even at this range. The distinctive ping of metal on metal reached them several seconds later, carried across the desert on the same wind that had tried to claim the bullet. Nobody spoke. Riley rose from the firing position, her face expressionless, and stepped back from the rifle. Maddox's mouth hung open. Barnes looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Chen was rechecking his binoculars as if he couldn't trust what he'd just seen. The other snipers stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Senior Chief Rowe was the first to recover. "Confirm the hit." Lieutenant Barnes raised his rangefinder with shaking hands, checking the target downrange. "Confirmed. Center mass. She actually hit it." "That's impossible," Maddox said, his voice hollow. Nobody makes that shot on the first try. Nobody." Riley said nothing. She stood with her hands at her sides, waiting. Rowe approached her, his expression unreadable. "Where did you train, petty officer?" "Various locations." "Senior Chief, my service record is classified." "Classified," Maddox repeated, but the mockery was gone from his voice, now replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm a sniper staff sergeant, just like you." "No," Maddox said, shaking his head. "No, you're not just like us. That shot, that was..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Chen stepped forward, his analytical mind already working through the implications. "The conditions haven't changed. The wind's the same, the temperature's the same, the distance is the same. What did you see that we didn't? Riley considered the question for a moment. You calculated for what the conditions were. I calculated for what they would be when the bullet arrived. The simplicity of the statement made it somehow more devastating. Barnes ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. The temperature gradient, Chen said slowly, understanding dawning. You accounted for the cooling air as the sun descends. Among other things. Maddox found his voice again, though it had lost its earlier confidence. You're telling me that we all missed because we didn't account for a few degrees of temperature change over the course of the bullet's flight. Not just temperature. Wind gradient across altitude. The Coriolis effect is more pronounced at extreme range than most ballistic calculators suggest. The spin drift of the bullet, the density altitude based on current barometric pressure, which is dropping as a weather front moves in from the west. Riley rattled off the factors calmly as if discussing a grocery list. Each one is small, but at 3,600 meters, small errors compound into large misses. Rose studied her with new intensity. How many shots have you made at this range? Riley hesitated. I'm not at liberty to discuss my operational history, Senior Chief. That's not what I asked. More than I can count. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Maddox backed away from Riley as if she'd suddenly become dangerous, which in a sense she had. The quiet woman they dismissed as a diversity hire had just demonstrated a level of skill that exceeded anything they'd imagined possible. I want to see her record, Maddox said to Rowe. I want to know who authorized her to be here, what unit she comes from, everything. Her record is classified, Rowe replied. I checked when I saw her name on the roster. Everything about her service history is redacted above my clearance level. What does that mean? It means, Rowe said slowly, that Petty Officer Voss has been doing things that people like you and me aren't allowed to know about. Barnes approached Riley cautiously, like someone approaching a wild animal. The longest confirmed kill in history is just over 3,000 meters. You're telling me you've been making shots that exceed that regularly? I'm not telling you anything, Lieutenant. I'm not authorized to discuss my work. But I made a shot, Riley interrupted. That's all. One shot at one target under controlled conditions. That's not classified. That's just marksmanship. Maddox let out a bitter laugh. Just marksmanship. Right. And I'm just a guy who holds a rifle sometimes. He turned to the other snipers. Do you all understand what just happened here? We just got shown up by someone we've been dismissing all day. Someone we didn't even bother to ask about because we assumed we knew everything we needed to know. His voice rose with each word, anger and humiliation mixing into something toxic. We let our egos blind us, and now we look like idiots. Speak for yourself, Chen said quietly. I'd rather learn from someone better than stay ignorant out of pride. Maddox rounded on him. Better, you're calling her better. She made the shot. We didn't. That's not opinion, that's objective fact. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Riley remained still, her posture relaxed but ready, watching the dynamics play out around her with the detachment of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Rowe raised a hand, commanding attention. Enough. Maddox, you're dismissed for the day. Go cool off before you say something that ends up in your permanent record. Chief? Now, Staff Sergeant. Maddox's face went through several more interesting color changes before he spun on his heel and stalked away, kicking up sand with each angry step. The other snipers watched him go with mixed expressions. Rowe turned back to Riley. Can you replicate that shot? Yes, Senior Chief. How many times? As many times as you have ammunition. Rowe's eyebrows rose fractionally. That's a bold claim. It's a statement of fact. At this range with these conditions, my hit probability is approximately 94%. Chen whistled softly. 94% at 3,600 meters. Do you understand how insane that sounds? I understand the math, Gunny. Barnes cleared as though church. Senior Chief, with respect, I think we need to reevaluate who's training who here. If Petty Officer Voss can maintain that level of accuracy, she should be instructing this course, not attending it. Several other snipers nodded agreement, though a few still looked uncertain, wrestling with their own prejudices and assumptions. Rowe considered this. Voss, would you be willing to demonstrate your technique? Show us what we're missing. Riley's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. If you order me to Senior Chief, I'm not ordering, I'm asking. The distinction mattered, and Riley understood that. Roe was offering her a choice, giving her the power to decide whether to help the men who'd mocked her just minutes ago. She could refuse a walk away, let them struggle with their ignorance and their wounded pride. But that wasn't who she was. I'll help, she said simply. Roe nodded. Good. Barnes set up the next target. Chen, you're first up for coaching. Everyone else grab a notebook. Class is in session. Riley finished collecting her equipment and walked back to her position near the tent, her movements deliberate and controlled. She could feel Maddox's eyes on her back, waiting for her to react to give him an excuse to escalate further. She gave him nothing. Chen fired his first shot. The sound rolled across the desert like distant thunder. Everyone watched the hillside through binoculars, waiting for the telltale puff of dust that would indicate impact. Nothing came. The bullet had disappeared into the vastness of Arizona, somewhere between here and the target swallowed by physics and miscalculation. Adjust 2 MOA right, half MOA up, the spotter called out. Chen fired again. Another miss. And again. 3 shots, 3 failures. When he stood up from the rifle, his face was tight with frustration, the kind that comes from doing everything right and still failing. Next, Maddox barked. Lieutenant Barnes took position. Riley watched him work, noting the way his spotter called corrections, the way Barnes adjusted his scope between shots. She could see the errors before he pulled the trigger, could calculate in her head where each bullet would go based on the settings he was using. She said nothing. Barnes fired 4 times. 4 misses. When the 4th round failed to connect, he slammed his palm against the sand beside the rifle. This is impossible. The wind's shifting every 30 seconds. There's no consistency. There's always consistency, Chen said quietly. We're just not seeing it. Maddox paced behind the firing line like a caged animal, his agitation growing with each failed attempt. We're the best in the world, and we can't hit a stationary target. What's command going to say when we tell them we failed? Roe remained silent, but his jaw was working in a way that suggested he was calculating something beyond just the ballistics of the situation. The 6th sniper was a man named Rodriguez, who'd made a legendary shot in Syria that had saved an entire patrol. He approached the rifle with quiet confidence, settled into position, and began his breathing routine. Riley watched his hands, watched the way he checked his bubble level, the way his finger found the trigger. Rodriguez fired. The shot went wide, by at least 10 feet, impacting the hillside well left of the target. God damn it! Rodriguez erupted, slamming his fist into the ground. I had everything perfect. The wind, the elevation, everything. Clearly not everything, Maddox snapped. Try again. Rodriguez fired twice more each shot, missing by varying margins. When he stood up, there was something broken in his expression, the look of a man whose understanding of his own capabilities had just been fundamentally challenged. Riley shifted her weight slightly, her mind running calculations. She could see it now, the pattern in the failures. They were all calculating correctly for the immediate conditions, but they were treating the bullet's flight path as static when it was actually dynamic. The air temperature was dropping as the sun descended, creating thermal layers that shifted the bullet's trajectory in ways their ballistic calculators couldn't predict. The wind wasn't just blowing horizontally. It was spiraling up the face of the hillside where the target sat, creating updrafts that pushed bullets high and right. But more than that, they were all using the same flawed assumption about the Coriolis effect. The standard formula worked fine out to 2,000 meters, maybe 2,500, but at 3,600 meters, the Earth's rotation had a more pronounced impact than the simple calculations suggested. They needed to account for the azimuth of fire, the latitude, even the time of day. The 7th sniper missed 3 times. The 8th sniper, a quiet man named Patterson who rarely spoke, fired 4 rounds without a single hit. Each failure seemed to feed Maddox's growing fury. This is unacceptable, he roared after the 9th sniper's final miss. We're supposed to be elite. We're supposed to be the standard that everyone else aspires to. And we can't even... Maybe the standard isn't as high as you thought, Riley said quietly. Every head turned toward her. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of wind across the desert. Maddox's face went from red to nearly purple. What did you just say to me? Riley met his gaze without flinching. I said maybe the standard isn't as high as you thought. You're all using the same calculations, the same assumptions, the same methodology. If the methodology is flawed, skill doesn't matter. Flawed on. Maddox took 3 steps toward her, his hands clenched into fist. You're calling our methodology flawed, you who haven't even fired a single shot yet that are questioning how we do things. I'm questioning the results, Riley replied calmly. 9 expert shooters, 0 hits. That's not a skill problem. That's a systemic problem. Chen stepped forward, his analytical mind already working through the implications. What would you do differently? I'd stop treating the shot as a single calculation and start treating it as a predictive model. The conditions when you pull the trigger aren't the conditions when the bullet arrives at target. Barnes laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think we don't know that? We account for bullet flight time in our calculations. You account for average conditions across the flight time, Riley said. But the conditions aren't average. The air temperature drops approximately 0.8 degrees for every minute after 3 p.m. in desert environments. Your bullet is in flight for over 8 seconds. That's a temperature change occurring in real time while the bullet is traveling, creating density variations that affect trajectory. The snipers exchanged glances. Rodriguez spoke up. The temperature change over 8 seconds would be negligible, hundredths of a degree at most. At the firing line, yes, but the bullet travels through different air masses at different altitudes. The air at 20 feet above ground is cooler than the air at ground level by the time it reaches 1,500 meters downrange. That difference compounds. Maddox interrupted. This is theoretical nonsense. You're making excuses for why you're going to fail when you finally get the guts to actually try the shot. I'm explaining why everyone else has failed, Riley corrected. Whether I succeed or not doesn't change the math. Then prove it, Maddox challenged. You're so smart, you understand the conditions so much better than all of us combined, then get up there and show us how it's done. Riley looked at Rowe, senior chief. Rowe studied her for a long moment, his weathered face impossible to read. Finally, he nodded. Make your attempt, petty officer. The walk to the firing line felt longer than it should have. Riley could feel every pair of eyes on her back, could sense the mixture of skepticism, hostility, and in a few cases, genuine curiosity. She knelt beside the Barrett M82, still warm from Patterson's failed attempts, and began her pre-shot routine. The rifle was a tool, nothing more. It didn't care who held it, didn't judge, didn't have expectations. It followed the laws of physics with absolute consistency, which made it the most honest thing on the range. You'll want to adjust the scope, Barnes called out. Patterson's eye relief is different from yours. Riley ignored him. She was checking the scope mounts, making sure nothing had come loose during the previous shooter session. One of the mounting screws had backed out a quarter turn. She tightened it carefully, then checked the bore alignment, the bipod tension, the trigger pull weight. Any day now, Maddox said. Or are you stalling? Riley settled into position behind the rifle, pressing her cheek against the stock. Through the scope, the target appeared as a small rectangular shape, wavering in the heat distortion. 3,617 meters. She noted the extra 17 meters automatically. Her breathing slowed. 4 breaths per minute, the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times until it became as natural as walking. Her heart rate dropped, settling into the low 50s, where it would remain until after the shot. The memories came unbidden, as they always did when she was behind a rifle. Her father's voice. The shot begins before you touch the trigger, Riley. It begins in your mind, in your preparation, in your willingness to trust the process even when everything tells you to doubt. Captain Hale's voice. Emotion is the enemy. The rifle doesn't care if you're angry or scared or proud. It only cares about the inputs you give it. Make the inputs correct, and the output is inevitable. She pushed the voices away, focusing on the present. Wind speed at the firing line was 5.3 miles per hour, quartering from the right. But that was just the beginning of the calculation. She needed to read the wind across the entire flight path. Riley watched the mirage, the way heat rising off the sand created visible distortions in the air. Most snipers treated mirage as noise, something to see through or ignore. Riley treated it as signal, as information about air movement and temperature gradients that no instrument could measure. The wind at 1,000 meters was stronger than at the firing line, gusting to 7 miles per hour, based on the way distant brush moved. At 2,000 meters, the wind had shifted slightly more to the right, pushed by the terrain, features she could barely see. At 3,000 meters, the hillside created updrafts that would push the bullet high if she didn't account for them. Or she made microscopic adjustments to the scope, calculating in her head. Distance 3,617 meters. Bullet drop 942 inches, adjusted for the actual air density based on current barometric pressure and temperature. Windage, she ran the numbers through the formula accounting for wind gradient across altitude and the way the spinning bullet would drift right independent of wind. But the critical factor was the one nobody else had considered, the temperature gradient. It was 3:27 p.m. The sun had been descending for the past hour, and the cooling process had already begun. The air at ground level was 104 degrees. The air at 20 feet was 102. The difference seemed small, but over 3,600 meters, small differences became large misses. She calculated the bullet's trajectory through different air densities, factoring in how the cooling air would affect drag, how the density changes would alter the bullet's path in ways the standard ballistic calculator couldn't predict. And then there was the Coriolis effect. At this latitude, firing toward the southeast, the Earth's rotation would push the bullet right by approximately 18 inches. The standard formula suggested 12 inches, but the standard formula was wrong at extreme range. Riley made her final adjustments and settled into the shot. "She's been on that rifle for 5 minutes," Rodriguez muttered. "What's she doing praying?" "She's calculating," Chen replied quietly. "Look at her breathing. She's in the zone." Maddox opened his mouth to say something, but Rowe cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Let her work." Riley's finger found the trigger, applying pressure so gradually that the break came as a surprise even to her. The Barrett roared and the recoil slammed into her shoulder with familiar force. She rode it perfectly, her eye remaining pressed to the scope, tracking the bullet's path through the scope's field of view. 8.4 seconds of flight time. She counted in her head, measuring the interval between shot and impact based on her calculations. 8 seconds, 8.2, 8.4. The distant steel target erupted in a shower of dust and paint fragments. The distinctive metallic ping reached them several seconds later, carried across the desert on the wind that had tried and failed to claim the bullet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched until it became painful. Riley stood up from the rifle, her face expressionless, and stepped back. Barnes raised his rangefinder with shaking hands. "Confirmed. Center mass hit. That's not possible." "Check again," Maddox demanded, his voice hollow. "I've checked 3 times, Staff Sergeant. It's a confirmed hit. Dead center." Maddox stared at the distant target as if it had personally betrayed him. That was luck. Had to be. Nobody makes that shot on the first attempt. "Want me to do it again?" Riley asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maddox turned toward her slowly, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, fear. They were all there fighting for dominance. "Yes," he finally said. "I want you to do it again, because if you can't replicate that shot, it proves it was luck." Rowe intervened. "Petty Officer Voss, what's your estimated hit probability at this range under these conditions?" 94%, Senior Chief." Chen let out a low whistle. 94% at 3,600 meters. That's not human. "It's math," Riley replied. "Just math." Rodriguez stepped forward, his earlier frustration replaced by genuine curiosity. Show me what you're seeing that we're not." Riley hesitated, glancing at Rowe for permission. The Senior Chief nodded slightly. "The wind you're reading at the firing line doesn't matter," Riley began. "It's gone by the time the bullet travels 50 meters. You need to read wind across the entire flight path, and you need to account for how wind changes with altitude and terrain." "We do account for that," Barnes protested. "You account for it statically. But wind isn't static. It's dynamic, changing based on temperature, terrain, and a dozen other factors. You need to read the mirage, understand what it's telling you about air movement." She knelt beside the rifle again, gesturing for them to gather around. "But the real issue is the temperature gradient. Look at the time, it's 3:30 p.m. The sun's descending and the air is cooling. That cooling isn't uniform across altitude or distance. The air near the ground cools faster than air higher up, creating density layers that affect bullet trajectory." Patterson, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "How do you calculate for that there's no instrument that measures temperature gradient across 3,000 meters? You observe and interpolate. Watch the way heat distortion changes across distance. Areas where the mirage is more pronounced are warmer. Areas where it's less pronounced are cooler. Your brain can calculate the gradient if you train it to see the pattern. Maddox's laugh was bitter. You're telling me you can calculate air temperature gradients across 2 miles by looking at heat shimmer? That's not marksmanship, that's fortune-telling. Then explain the hit, Chen said quietly. Maddox had no answer for that. Riley stood up again. The other factor you're missing is the Coriolis effect at extreme range. The formula you're using is accurate out to maybe 2,500 meters. Beyond that, you need to account for the azimuth of fire and the latitude. At this latitude firing southeast, the effect is more pronounced than your calculator suggests. Barnes pulled out his ballistic calculator, running numbers. His face paled as he worked through the math. She's right, the standard formula underestimates Coriolis at this range by almost 30%. We've been systematically missing right because our calculations were wrong. Not wrong, Riley corrected, just incomplete. The formulas work fine at normal engagement ranges. It's only at extreme distances that these secondary factors become primary. Rodriguez looked at the distant target, then back at Riley. How many times have you made shots at this range? I'm not authorized to discuss my operational history. That means a lot, Chen said. That means you've been doing this regularly enough that it's classified. Maddox's hands were trembling now. Whether from anger or something else, it was impossible to tell. I don't care about your classified missions or your theoretical calculations. I care about results. You made one shot. One that doesn't make you an expert. That doesn't make you better than us. I never said I was better, Riley replied calmly. I said I understood the factors you were missing. There's a difference. Prove it, Maddox challenged again. Make the shot again and again. Show us it wasn't luck. Rose stepped in. Maddox, stand down. You're letting your ego. With respect, Chief, this isn't about ego. This is about capability. If Petty Officer Voss can consistently make shots that we can, then we need to understand why. And the only way to know if she can do it consistently is to see her do it again. Riley looked at Rowe. I'll shoot as many times as you want, Senior Chief. But every round I fire is a round someone else could have used for training. If the goal is to help everyone improve, I should be teaching, not shooting. The generosity of the offer seemed to catch Maddox off guard. He'd been expecting arrogance, maybe even gloating. Instead, he got someone offering to help the people who'd been mocking her all day. Barnes cleared his throat. I'd like to learn. Whatever you're seeing that I'm not, I want to understand it. Chen nodded agreement. Same. Pride isn't worth staying ignorant. One by one, the other snipers indicated their willingness to learn until only Maddox stood apart, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Fine, he finally said. Teach us. But if this is some kind of trick, if you got lucky with that one shot and you're trying to cover it up with theory, then you'll know soon enough, Riley finished for him. Chen, you're up first. Get behind the rifle. Chen settled into position and Riley knelt beside him. First, forget everything you think you know about this shot. Your ballistic calculator is giving you wrong information because it's using incomplete formulas. We need to calculate manually. For the next 20 minutes, Riley walked Chen through her methodology, explaining how to read Mirage's temperature data, how to observe wind across distance, how to calculate the actual Coriolis effect rather than the approximation. Chen listened intently, asking sharp questions that showed he understood the underlying physics. When Chen finally took his shot, the bullet impacted 6 inches left of center, not perfect, but a dramatic improvement over his earlier attempts. Again, Riley instructed, you overcorrected for the wind gradient. Trust the Mirage reading more than your instinct. Chen's second shot hit 2 inches right of center. His third shot was dead center, and when the impact confirmed, he let out a whoop of triumph that echoed across the desert. Barnes was next, then Rodriguez, then Patterson. Each one struggled initially with Riley's methodology, fought against their ingrained habits and assumptions, but slowly, shot by shot, they began to improve. Not everyone hit center mass. The shot was still extraordinarily difficult, but the missed distances decreased dramatically. Maddox watched it all with an expression that grew darker with each successful hit. When it was finally his turn, he approached the rifle with obvious reluctance. I don't need your help, he said when Riley knelt beside him. Suit yourself, Riley replied, standing up and stepping back. Maddox settled into position and fired. The shot missed left by 15 feet, worse than any of his earlier attempts. His face flushed with humiliation. The wind shifted, he muttered. I didn't account for. The wind's been consistent for the past 40 minutes, Riley said quietly. You missed because you're too angry to shoot straight. Emotion is affecting your judgment. Maddox's head snapped toward her. You don't know anything about what I'm feeling. I know you're furious that someone you dismissed made a shot you couldn't. I know your ego is bruised. I know you're struggling with the fact that your assumptions were wrong. And I know all of that is affecting your ability to focus on the fundamentals. The words were delivered without malice, just stated as observable facts. Somehow that made them worse. Get behind the rifle again, Riley said. This time close your eyes and take 5 deep breaths before you look through the scope. Clear your head. I don't need meditation. You need to get out of your own way, Riley interrupted. Your mechanics are solid. Your understanding of ballistics is excellent. Your problem isn't knowledge or skill. It's emotion. You're fighting yourself instead of the shot. Maddox stared at her for a long moment, then settled back behind the rifle. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, visibly struggling to let go of his anger. When he opened his eyes and looked through the scope, something had shifted in his posture. Riley knelt beside him again. Now tell me what you see in the mirage at 1,500 meters. Maddox studied the wavering air. It's denser than at 1,000 meters. The waves are tighter, which means warmer air, rising heat. He paused thinking, which means I need to account for the bullet passing through a thermal layer that will affect trajectory. Good. Now tell me about the wind. They worked through the calculation together, Riley guiding him through the methodologies she developed over years of training. When Maddox finally fired the bullet, it impacted 8 inches high and 4 inches right, close but not centered. Better, Riley said. You rushed the trigger, pull at the end. You knew it was going to be close and you got excited. Anticipation threw the shot off. Maddox reloaded and settled in again. This time when he fired, the bullet struck 5 inches left of center. Still not perfect, but respectable at this range. His third shot hit dead center. The impact seemed to break something in him. His shoulders sagged, and when he stood up from the rifle, there was something different in his eyes, resignation maybe, or acceptance. I was wrong, he said quietly, addressing Riley. About you, about what you're capable of. I let my assumptions blind me, and that's on me. Riley nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. Rowe had been watching the entire session from a distance. Now he approached his expression, thoughtful. Petty Officer Voss, I'm reassigning you. Effective immediately, you'll be transferred to the Naval Precision Warfare School as an instructor. Your classification will be adjusted to allow you to teach these methodologies. Senior Chief Riley began. That's not a request, Petty Officer. You've demonstrated expertise that's too valuable to keep in the field. We need you training the next generation. Maddox's head jerked up. Chief, with respect, she just humiliated us. You're rewarding her for making us look incompetent. I'm recognizing exceptional ability, Rowe replied sharply. Something you should have done hours ago instead of letting your prejudices cloud your judgment. Voss didn't humiliate anyone. You humiliated yourselves by dismissing her without cause. The rebuke stung, and Maddox had no response. Rowe turned back to Riley. You report to Coronado in 72 hours. Between now and then, I want you to document your methodology in writing. Every calculation, every observation technique, everything. It's going to become part of the official curriculum. Riley came to attention. Yes, Senior Chief. As the sun descended toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Arizona desert, the snipers began packing up their equipment. The atmosphere had shifted from hostile to thoughtful as each man processed what they'd witnessed and learned. Chen approached Riley as she was cleaning the barrette. Thank you for not rubbing it in our faces. You could have made us look a lot worse than you did. That wasn't the goal, Riley replied. The goal was to help. Still, not everyone would have been that generous after the way we treated you. Riley paused in her cleaning. Captain Hale used to say that holding grudges takes energy you could be using to improve. I'd rather spend my energy getting better. Barnes joined them. This Captain Hale, he the one who taught you all this. He taught me to think differently about problems. The rest came from practice. How much practice? Riley smiled slightly. Enough that I don't count anymore. As the last of the equipment was loaded into vehicles and the snipers prepared to leave, Maddox approached Riley one final time. His posture was different now, less aggressive, more uncertain. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you're a good teacher, because if you can turn average snipers into shooters like you, that'll save lives downrange. That's the plan, Riley replied. Maddox nodded and walked away, leaving Riley alone on the range as the desert sky turned orange and purple with the sunset. She thought about Captain Hale, about the lessons he taught her, about the path that had led her to this moment. He told her once that the measure of a warrior wasn't in how well they fought, but in how well they taught others to fight. Tomorrow, she'd start writing her methodology. In 72 hours, she'd begin teaching it. And somewhere down the line, the techniques she'd pioneered would save lives in ways she'd never know about. That was enough. 72 hours later, Riley walked through the gates of Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a folder containing her methodology documentation. The guard at the entrance checked her credentials twice, his eyebrows rising when he saw her clearance level before waving her through without comment. The Precision Warfare School occupied a cluster of buildings near the beach close enough that she could smell salt air mixed with gun oil and sweat. Riley had been here before years ago during her initial sniper training, but she'd been a student then, trying to prove she belonged. Now she was returning as an instructor, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Commander James Pritchard was waiting in his office when she arrived. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair, cut military short, and eyes that had seen too many funerals. He gestured for Riley to sit without preamble. "Senior Chief Rowe sent me your documentation," Pritchard said, tapping the folder on his desk. "I've read it 3 times. Twice because I didn't believe what I was reading, and once more to make sure I understood the implications." Riley remained silent, waiting. "Do you understand what you've done here?" Pritchard continued. "You've essentially rewritten the book on extreme-range precision fire. The methodologies we've been teaching for the past decade are based on formulas that you've proven are inadequate. The formulas work fine at normal ranges, sir. It's only at extreme distances that—" "I know what you wrote," Pritchard interrupted. "What I'm asking is whether you understand the political nightmare you've created. We've got thousands of graduates who've been trained using the old methodology. We've got contracts with ballistic calculator manufacturers who are going to scream bloody murder when we tell them their products are wrong. We've got allied nations who train with our curriculum who are going to question why we didn't know this sooner." Riley's stomach tightened. She'd been so focused on the technical achievement that she hadn't considered the institutional implications. Pritchard must have seen something in her expression because his tone softened slightly. "I'm not blaming you, petty officer. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You solved a problem. It's my job to deal with the fallout." He leaned back in his chair. "Which brings me to why you're here. I need you to prove this works with more than just yourself. I need you to take a class of students and turn them into shooters who can consistently hit at ranges we previously considered impossible." "How long do I have?" 12 weeks. 20 students ranging from intermediate to advanced skill levels. If 75% of them can achieve consistent hits at 3,500 meters by the end of the course, we'll adopt your methodology service-wide. If not—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Riley's mind raced through the math. 12 weeks to overcome years of ingrained training to teach not just techniques, but a completely different way of thinking about long-range shooting. It would require breaking down everything they thought they knew and rebuilding from scratch. "I'll need access to extended-range facilities," she said. "An authority to modify the curriculum is needed. Some of the students are going to resist the new methodology because it contradicts what they have already learned." Pritchard nodded. "You'll have full autonomy over curriculum and training schedule. Your students report tomorrow at 0600. Any questions?" "Just one, sir. What happens if I fail?" Pritchard's expression hardened. "Then we continue training snipers the way we always have, and people continue dying at ranges where we could have saved them if our shooters were better. No pressure." Riley left the office feeling the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. 20 students, 12 weeks, 75% success rate. The numbers kept cycling through her head as she made her way to the instructor's quarters. Her roommate turned out to be Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, a combat veteran who'd spent 6 years as a sniper before transitioning to instruction. Sarah looked up from the gear she was organizing when Riley entered. "You're the one who made that impossible shot in Arizona," Sarah said without preamble. "Word travels fast around here. Half the instructors think you're a once-in-a-generation talent. The other half think you got lucky and Roe is making a mistake bringing you in. What do you think? Sarah grinned. Think if you got lucky making that shot, I want to learn how to get that lucky. Your students are going to eat you alive tomorrow, by the way. I've seen the roster. Half of them are prior instructors themselves sent back for advanced training. They're not going to take kindly to someone younger than them telling them their fundamentals are wrong. Riley set her duffel on the empty bunk. Then I'll have to make sure I'm right. Oh, you're confident. I like that. Sarah stood up, extending her hand. Welcome to the hardest job in the Navy. Teaching snipers is worse than being a sniper because you've got to watch other people make mistakes and resist the urge to just take the shot yourself. They shook hands, and Riley felt some of the tension ease. At least she'd have one ally here. The next morning came too quickly. Riley stood in front of 20 faces, all male, all wearing expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. They'd assembled in the classroom at 0600 sharp, and now they were waiting to see what this woman who'd allegedly made an impossible shot had to teach them. My name is Petty Officer Riley Voss, she began. For the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you to make shots you currently think are impossible. By the end of this course, 75% of you will be able to consistently hit targets at 3,500 meters. The other 25% will wash out. A hand shot up immediately. The man attached to it was in his early 30s with the bearing of someone who'd been in combat. His name tape read Collins. With respect, Petty Officer, I've been shooting professionally for 8 years. I've made confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. What makes you think you can teach me something I don't already know? Riley had expected this, because your maximum effective range is about to increase by 50%, and the techniques that got you to 2,000 meters won't get you to 3,500. The physics change at extreme range in ways that aren't intuitive. Another student spoke up without raising his hand. We've all heard about your shot in Arizona. One shot doesn't make you qualified to teach. You're right, Riley agreed. One shot doesn't. But I've made that shot or shots like it more than 300 times over the past 4 years. My hit probability at 3,500 meters is 94%. What's yours? The silence that followed was answer enough. Riley pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. Everything you've learned about long-range shooting is correct up to about 2,500 meters. Beyond that, the simplified formulas we use start breaking down. The Coriolis effect becomes nonlinear. Temperature gradients create density variations that standard calculators can't predict. Wind patterns become three-dimensional in ways that require observation, not calculation. Collins raised his hand again. Are you saying our ballistic calculators are wrong? I'm saying they're incomplete. They use approximations that work fine at normal ranges, but fail at extreme distances. To hit consistently beyond 3,000 meters, you need to supplement calculator data with real-time environmental observation. A student in the back name tape reading Morrison let out a skeptical laugh. Real-time environmental observation. You mean guessing? I mean reading mirage patterns to determine temperature gradients across distance. I mean observing vegetation movement at multiple ranges to map wind variation. I mean calculating actual Coriolis drift based on azimuth and latitude rather than relying on simplified formulas. Morrison leaned back in his chair. And you can teach us to do all that in 12 weeks. I can teach you the methodology in 12 weeks. Mastering it will take years. But by the end of this course, you'll understand what's possible and have the tools to keep improving. Collins spoke again, his tone challenging. Prove it. Take us to the range right now and show us you can make this shot consistently. Because if you can't, why should we waste 12 weeks learning from someone who got lucky once? Riley had anticipated this too. She'd discussed it with Pritchard the previous evening, and they'd agreed that demonstrating capability early would establish credibility faster than any amount of lecturing. Fine, she said. Get your gear. We're going to the extended range. The students exchanged glances, surprise registering on several faces. They'd expected resistance, not immediate agreement. 30 minutes later, they were assembled at the extended range facility, a section of California desert that stretched for miles. Riley had already set up targets at 3,500 meters, barely visible as dark rectangles against the tan hillside. 5 shots, she announced. Cold bore, no warm-up rounds. I'll explain my thought process before each shot so you can hear how I'm calculating the variables. She settled behind a Barrett EMS 82, identical to the one she'd used in Arizona, and began her pre-shot routine. The students gathered around, some with notebooks out, others with arms crossed in obvious skepticism. Current time is 07:15, Riley said, her voice calm and clinical. Sun angle is low, which means minimal thermal gradient for the next hour. Wind at the firing line is 4.7 miles per hour from the west. But look at the vegetation at 1,500 meters. She pointed. It's moving faster, which indicates wind speed has increased to approximately 6 miles per hour. At 3,000 meters, the brush movement suggests 7 to 8 miles per hour with a slight northward component. Morrison muttered something that sounded like crystal ball reading, but Riley ignored him. Temperature is 72 degrees at the firing line, but the air over the desert floor will warm rapidly over the next hour. Right now, I'm calculating for current conditions with minimal thermal consideration. In 2 hours, that calculation would be completely different. She made her scope adjustments, talking through each one. Elevation 42.8 MOA, windage 3.22 MOA right. Coriolis correction 1.4 MOA right, adjusted for azimuth of fire. Total windage 4.6 MOA right. Collins was taking notes. That's a full MOA more windage than my calculator suggested for these conditions. Your calculator is using a simplified Coriolis formula, Riley explained. At this azimuth and latitude, the actual effect is 38% greater than the standard calculation. She settled into her breathing rhythm, her heart rate dropping automatically. The familiar calm descended the state where emotion disappeared and only physics remained. Her finger found the trigger pressure building gradually until the rifle fired almost without her conscious decision. 8.3 seconds later, the distant target showed an impact marker dead center. The metallic ping reached them moments after. Shot 1 center bio, Riley announced, resetting for shot 2. She cycled the bolt, chambered another round, and made minute adjustments to her scope. Wind is picked up slightly, now reading 5.1 at the firing line, 6.4 at 1,500 and 8.2 at 3,000. Adjusting windage to 4.9 MOA right. The second shot hit 3 inches left of center. Still well within the kill zone, but not perfect. Wind shifted during bullet flight, Riley explained. You can see it in the mirage pattern. There was a gust at 2,200 meters that I didn't fully account for. Shot 3, I'm adding 0.2 MOA to compensate. The third shot hit 1 inch right of center. The fourth shot was dead center again. The fifth shot hit 2 inches high and 1 inch right. Riley stood up from the rifle and turned to face the students. 5 shots, 5 hits, average deviation from center is 2.4 inches. At 3,500 meters, that's exceptional accuracy by any standard. Questions. The skepticism had visibly diminished, but Morrison wasn't quite ready to concede. You've obviously practiced this specific range extensively. Can you do the same at different distances? Different conditions? Riley gestured toward the range. Pick a distance, any distance over 3,000 meters. Morrison thought for a moment. 3,800 meters. Different target, different angle. Wind conditions are different at that range because of the terrain feature to the northeast. Riley studied the distant hillside where Morrison was pointing. She'd never shot at that specific target before, but the principles remained the same. 3 shots. Make it 5, like you just did. Riley settled back behind the rifle and began her observation phase. The new target was at a different angle, which meant recalculating Coriolis drift. The terrain feature Morrison mentioned did create different wind patterns. She could see it in the way dust moved near the 3,000-meter mark. She talked through her calculations again, walking the students through her methodology. When she fired the first shot, it impacted 4 inches left of center. The second shot hit 2 inches right. The third, fourth, and fifth shots all impacted within 3 inches of center. 5 for 5 at a range I've never shot before, Riley said. This isn't memorization, it's methodology, and I'm going to teach every one of you to do the same thing. Collins approached her as the other students were examining the impact markers through spotting scopes. I was wrong to doubt you, he said quietly. I've never seen shooting like that. But I have a question. Why aren't you still in the field? With skills like this, you could be saving lives on deployment. Riley's expression flickered just for a moment. I've saved lives in the field. Now I'm going to save more by teaching others. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was all she was willing to share. The real reason she'd been pulled from operational duty was classified, buried in the same files that contained her service record. Captain Hale's death had changed everything, had exposed operations that couldn't be exposed, had raised questions that couldn't be answered. Taking her off active deployment and putting her in instruction had been the Navy's way of protecting both her and the missions she'd been part of. The first week of instruction was brutal. Riley pushed the students hard, breaking down their existing techniques and forcing them to rebuild from scratch. She taught them to read mirage like a language, to see temperature and wind in the wavering air. She taught them to calculate Coriolis drift manually, to understand the physics rather than just trust a calculator. She taught them to observe, to think, to trust the process, even when their instincts screamed that it was wrong. Morrison washed out on day 4. He couldn't let go of his existing beliefs, couldn't accept that what he'd learned previously was incomplete. He fought Riley at every step, argued with every correction, and finally stormed out of a training session after missing 15 consecutive shots. "He's not the last one who'll quit," Sarah told Riley that evening. "Some people can't handle being told they're wrong, even when the evidence is right in front of them." 2 more students washed out by the end of week 1. Both were experienced snipers who couldn't reconcile Riley's methodology with their existing knowledge. They left angry, convinced that Riley was teaching nonsense, despite the fact that students who embraced the new techniques were already showing improvement. By week 2, the remaining 17 students had divided into 2 camps. 12 of them were fully committed, working extra hours to practice the observational skills Riley was teaching. The other 5 were still resistant, going through the motions, but not truly believing. Collins had become Riley's unofficial assistant, helping the struggling students and reinforcing the methodology. He'd gone from skeptic to true believer after making his first hit at 3,400 meters a shot he'd previously considered impossible. "I feel like I'm learning to shoot all over again," he told Riley during a break. "Everything I thought I knew still applies, but it's like, I don't know, like I was only seeing half the picture before." "That's exactly right," Riley replied. "The fundamentals don't change. Breathing, trigger control, body position, all of that stays the same. What changes is your understanding of the environment and how it affects the bullet." Week 3 brought the first major crisis. One of the resistance students, a man named Garrett, who'd been a sniper instructor at a different school, filed a formal complaint with Commander Pritchard. He claimed Riley's methodology was unproven and potentially dangerous, that she was teaching techniques that contradicted established doctrine without sufficient justification. Pritchard called Riley to his office that evening. "Garrett's making noise about unsafe practices. He's claiming you're encouraging students to ignore their ballistic calculators in favor of subjective observations." "That's not accurate, sir. I'm teaching them to supplement calculator data with environmental observation. The calculator is still the foundation, but it needs to be adjusted based on real-time conditions that the calculator can't measure." Pritchard steepled his fingers. "Prove it. Tomorrow morning, you and Garrett both take the same shot. Same rifle, same conditions, same target. He uses his methodology, you use yours. We'll see whose approach works better." Riley felt her stomach drop. "Sir, that's not a fair comparison. Garrett's been shooting for 15 years. He's extremely skilled within his methodology. If I miss and he hits, then maybe he's right, and I made a mistake bringing you here," Pritchard finished. "But if you hit and he misses, or if you both hit, but your methodology produces better accuracy, then that settles the argument. Tomorrow, 0700 extended range, 4,200 meters. That's 300 meters farther than you've demonstrated in front of the students." Riley left the office feeling like she'd been punched. 4,200 meters was beyond even her tested range. She'd made shots that far before, but not consistently, and never under the pressure of proving herself in front of students and a commander who was questioning whether she belonged here. That night, she lay awake running calculations in her head, trying to work through all the variables she'd encounter at that distance. The bullet flight time would exceed 9 seconds. The Coriolis drift would be significant. Any error in wind reading would be magnified to the point where even small miscalculations would result in complete misses. Sarah noticed her anxiety. "You're thinking too much. You've made harder shots than this." "Not with my entire career riding on the outcome." "Your career isn't riding on anything. You've already proven yourself. This is just Pritchard's way of shutting up a complainer." "What if I miss?" Sarah sat up in her bunk. "Then you miss. Riley, listen to me. You're the best shooter I've ever seen, and I've been around this community for a decade. One shot doesn't define you. One outcome doesn't determine your value. You know that, right?" Riley wanted to believe her, but doubt had already taken root. She thought about her father, about Captain Hale, about all the people who'd invested in her development. She thought about the students who trusted her methodology enough to unlearn years of training. If she failed tomorrow, she'd be letting all of them down. Morning came too fast. The entire class assembled at the range along with Commander Pritchard and several other senior instructors. Garrett stood near the firing line, looking confident, almost smug. Riley tried to quiet the anxiety churning in her gut. Pritchard laid out the rules. Same target, 4,200 meters. Each shooter gets 3 attempts. Best shot wins. Garrett, you're up first. Garrett settled behind the Barrett M82 with practiced ease. His spotter called out calculations, feeding him data from a high-end ballistic calculator. Garrett made his adjustments smoothly, confidently, like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. His first shot missed left by 12 feet. His second shot missed right by 8 feet. His third shot impacted the hillside 6 feet below the target. 3 misses, 0 hits. Garrett stood up from the rifle, his confidence shaken. The conditions are too variable. The wind's shifting too much at that range. Pritchard turned to Riley. Your turn, petty officer. Riley approached the rifle on legs that felt unsteady. Her heart was pounding too fast, her breathing too shallow. She could feel everyone watching, judging, waiting to see if she'd fail. She forced herself to settle into her pre-shot routine, to trust the process that had never failed her before. Breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The anxiety began to recede, replaced by the familiar calm of the shooter's trance. She read the mirage across the entire 4,200-meter distance, noting temperature variations that her eyes could barely detect. She observed wind patterns across multiple ranges, building a 3-dimensional map in her mind of how air was moving across the bullet's flight path. She calculated Coriolis drift for the specific azimuth and latitude, adding corrections that Garrett's calculator would never suggest. And then she thought about Captain Hale. She could almost hear his voice. Trust the math, Riley. Trust the process. Emotion will kill you. Let it go. She let it go. All the anxiety, all the pressure, all the fear of failure. She released it into the desert air and focused only on the shot. Her finger found the trigger. Pressure built gradually, inevitably. The rifle fired, 9.1 seconds of flight time. She counted silently, tracking the bullet's arc in her mind rather than through the scope. The distant target erupted in dust and paint. Center mass. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, 4 or 5. Then Collins started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire class was applauding, the sound echoing across the empty desert. Riley stood up from the rifle, her face expressionless, but inside she felt something break loose, relief, validation, maybe even pride. Pritchard approached her. Make it again. Riley didn't hesitate. She settled back behind the rifle, went through her routine, and fired. 8.9 seconds later, the target showed another center mass impact. Once more, Pritchard ordered. The third shot hit 4 inches left of center. Still a solid hit at that range, but not perfect. Pritchard turned to Garrett. You're dismissed from this course. Report to admin for reassignment. Garrett's face went red. Sir, you can't. I just did. You filed a complaint claiming Petty Officer Voss's methodology was unsafe and unproven. She just proved it works at a range where your methodology failed completely. You're dismissed. Garrett opened his mouth to argue, seemed to think better of it, and stalked off the range without another word. Pritchard addressed the remaining students. Anyone else want to question whether you should be learning from Petty Officer Voss? Anyone else think their existing knowledge is superior to what she's teaching? Speak up now. Silence greeted his question. Good. Then I suggest you stop wasting time being skeptical and start learning everything she's willing to teach you. Dismissed. As the students filed away, Collins approached Riley. That was the most impressive shooting that I've ever witnessed. 4,200 meters cold, bore 3 for 3. That's not human. It's just math, Riley said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was exhausted emotionally and physically drained from the stress of the past 12 hours. Sarah appeared at her elbow. Come on, you need food and sleep in that order. As they walked back toward the instruction building, Sarah spoke quietly. You know, you just became a legend, right? By tomorrow morning, every sniper in the Navy is going to know your name. Riley wasn't sure how she felt about that. Fame had never been the goal. Competence was the goal. Excellence was the goal. Being the best version of herself that Captain Hale had believed she could become, that was the goal. The remaining 9 weeks of instruction went smoothly, with Garrett gone and the other resistant students either washing out or finally committing to the methodology. The class made rapid progress. By week 612 of the remaining 16 students were consistently hitting targets at 3,200 meters. By week 8, that number had increased to 14 students, and the range had extended to 3,400 meters. The final exam was scheduled for week 12. Each student would have to make 5 consecutive hits at 3,500 meters with at least 80% accuracy. Riley had set the bar high, knowing that anything less wouldn't adequately demonstrate mastery of the methodology. The night before the exam, Collins found Riley reviewing student performance data in the classroom. "Can't sleep," he asked. "Just making sure I didn't miss anything. If they fail tomorrow, it's on me." Collins pulled up a chair. "They're not going to fail. You've prepared them better than any instructor I've ever had. Whatever happens tomorrow is on them, not you. 75% need to pass for Pritchard to adopt the methodology service-wide," Riley said. 16 students means 12 need to succeed. That's a narrow margin. 14 are going to pass, Collins said with certainty. "I've watched them. They've got it. They understand not just the techniques, but the underlying principles. You didn't just teach them to shoot better, you taught them to think differently." Riley wanted to believe him, but doubt was a persistent companion. She'd invested 12 weeks into these students, had pushed them harder than any instructor they'd ever had demanded excellence, and refused to accept mediocrity. If it all fell apart tomorrow because she'd missed something, failed to prepare them adequately, miscalculated what they were capable of. "Stop," Collins interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "I can see what you're doing. You're catastrophizing. Captain Hale wouldn't want that." Riley's head snapped up. "How do you know about Captain Hale?" Collins smiled. "I asked around, talked to some people who served with him. He spoke about you, you know, not by name, operational security and all, but he talked about a student who had natural talent beyond anything he'd ever seen. Someone who understood that precision shooting was as much philosophy as mechanics. That was you, wasn't it?" Riley's throat tightened. "He never told me that." "He wouldn't have. From what I heard, he believed praise made people complacent. But he believed in you enough to push you harder than anyone else. The question is, do you believe in your students the way he believed in you?" The question hit harder than Riley expected. She'd been so focused on her own performance, on proving her methodology worked, that she'd lost sight of the fact that her students' success would be their achievement, not hers. Her job was to give them the tools. What they did with those tools was up to them. "Yeah," she said finally, "I believe in them." "Then get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The final exam began at 0700 sharp. Commander Pritchard was there, along with a dozen senior instructors and even a few officers from SEAL Command. Word had spread about the new methodology, and people wanted to see if it actually worked at scale. The first student up was a young petty officer named Jackson, who'd struggled initially but had shown dramatic improvement over the past month. He settled behind the rifle, his breathing already in the familiar rhythm Riley had drilled into all of them. He read the mirage, calculated his corrections, and fired his first shot. Hit. Center mass. 4 more shots. 4 more hits. Jackson's accuracy was 96%, well above the required threshold. The second student matched Jackson's performance. The third student hit 4 out of 5, 80%, exactly at the passing threshold. By midday 11, students had completed the exam. 10 had passed. 1 had failed, managing only 60% accuracy. That meant Riley needed at least 2 more passes from the remaining 5 students to hit the 75% threshold. Collins was up next. He approached the firing line with calm confidence, settled into position, and proceeded to hit 5 out of 5 shots with an average deviation from center of less than 2 inches. When he stood up from the rifle, he caught Riley's eye and nodded once. 12 passes, 3 students remaining. Riley had already exceeded the 75% threshold, but she wanted more. She wanted every student who committed to the methodology to succeed. The next student hit 4 out of 5. The one after that hit all 5. The final student, a quiet specialist named Torres, who'd never shot beyond 2,000 meters before this course, approached the rifle with visible nervousness. Riley walked over to him. "You've got this. Trust your training." Torres nodded but said nothing. He settled behind the rifle and began his observation phase. Riley could see him working through the calculations, reading the mirage, mapping the wind. His first shot missed high by 6 inches, still technically a hit at that range, but outside the kill zone. Torres took a breath, made corrections, and fired again. Center mass. 3 more shots, 3 more hits, 4 out of 5, 80% accuracy. Pass. 14 out of 16 students had passed the exam, 87.5% success rate, well above the required threshold. Pritchard approached Durali as the students were celebrating. Congratulations, Petty Officer. Your methodology is now official curriculum. We'll begin implementing it across all sniper training programs within the next quarter. Riley felt relief wash over her, but it was tempered by exhaustion. 12 weeks of constant pressure, of proving herself over and over, of carrying the weight of institutional change on her shoulders. It was done. She'd succeeded. There's one more thing, Pritchard continued. We've had requests from allied nations asking for access to this training. The British SAS Australian, SASR Canadian, JTF2, they all want to send students. You're going to be busy. Riley nodded, processing the information. Her methodology would spread beyond the Navy, would potentially save lives across multiple military organizations. It was what Captain Hale would have wanted: knowledge shared excellence, propagated warriors made better through understanding rather than just repetition. That evening, after the celebrations had died down and the students had dispersed, Riley found herself alone on the beach watching the sun set over the Pacific. She thought about her father, about Captain Hale, about the path that had led her from that Montana wilderness to this California shore. She thought about Maddox and his anger about Garrett and his resistance about all the people who doubted her along the way. She thought about Collins and Chen and Jackson and all the students who trusted her enough to unlearn what they thought they knew. Most of all, she thought about the shooters who would come after, who would learn this methodology and use it to make impossible shots in impossible conditions, who would save lives because they understood physics and patience and the power of trusting the process. Captain Hale's voice came to her across the years, as clear as if he were standing beside her. The measure of a warrior isn't in how well they fight. It's in how well they teach others to fight. Riley smiled, feeling something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or purpose, or both. She'd found her mission, and she was just getting started. 6 months later, Riley stood in front of her 7th class of students, watching familiar patterns repeat themselves. The initial skepticism, the resistance to unlearning, the moment when doubt transformed into understanding. She'd guided 83 students through the program now, and 71 had passed. The success rate had climbed to 85%, even better than the initial class. But something felt wrong today. She couldn't name it, couldn't point to any specific detail, but her instincts were screaming that trouble was coming. Commander Pritchard confirmed those instincts when he pulled her aside after morning instruction. We have a problem, a serious one. Riley followed him to his office, her mind racing through possibilities. Budget cuts, political interference, another instructor filing complaints. Pritchard closed the door behind them and pulled up a classified report on his computer. 3 weeks ago, a Navy SEAL team attempted a high-value target elimination in Yemen. The shot required was 4,100 meters across an urban environment. The designated marksman, a graduate of your 3rd class, took the shot using your methodology. Riley's stomach tightened. What happened? He missed. The bullet struck a wall 6 feet left of target. The miss compromised the operation, and 2 team members were killed in the resulting firefight. The words hit like physical blows. Riley grabbed the edge of Pritchard's desk to steady herself. Who was the shooter? Petty Officer Marcus Webb. You certified him with 92% accuracy at 3,500 meters. Riley remembered Webb clearly. Smart, dedicated, one of the fastest learners in his class. He'd shown exceptional ability to read environmental conditions and had consistently made difficult shots during training. I need to see the mission data, she said. Wine conditions, temperature, time of day, everything. Pritchard shook his head. The mission details are classified above your level. What I can tell you is that Naval Special Warfare Command is questioning whether your methodology works outside controlled training environments. They're suggesting that the complexity of your calculations breaks down under operational stress. That's not what happened, Riley said immediately. Webb wouldn't have miscalculated that badly. Not with the training he received. Something else went wrong. What else could it be? Riley's mind raced through possibilities. Equipment failure. Bad intelligence on the target location. environmental factors that Webb couldn't have predicted. Or worst of all, the possibility that her methodology actually did break down under combat stress, that the cognitive load of her calculations was too much for shooters dealing with the chaos of real operations. "I need to talk to Webb," she said. "He's been relieved of sniper duties pending investigation, currently assigned to administrative work at Little Creek." "Then I need to go to Little Creek." Pritchard studied her for a long moment. "This isn't your fault, Riley. One failure doesn't invalidate everything you've accomplished. 2 SEALs are dead because someone I trained missed a shot. That makes it my responsibility. Or it makes it Webb's responsibility for executing poorly under pressure. I trained him to handle pressure. If he failed, I failed." Riley's voice was flat, emotionless, but inside she was screaming. 2 dead, 2 families destroyed, because she'd taught someone a methodology that maybe possibly wasn't as reliable as she'd believed. Pritchard sighed. "I'll arrange transportation to Little Creek, but Riley, understand that Naval Special Warfare is looking for someone to blame. If you go there claiming responsibility, they'll use you as a scapegoat. I don't care about protecting myself. I care about finding out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again." She left Coronado that evening on a military transport, her mind refusing to quiet. She kept replaying Webb's training sessions, looking for gaps in his education moments where she'd failed to adequately prepare him. The flight to Virginia was 6 hours of self-recrimination and analysis. Webb was waiting when she arrived at Little Creek, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His eyes were hollow, his posture defeated. When he saw Riley approaching, something broke in his expression. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm so sorry. I know I let you down. I let the team down. Stop," Riley interrupted. "Tell me exactly what happened. Every detail." They found an empty conference room and Webb pulled up a laptop containing his post-mission report. The target location appeared on screen along with environmental data and Webb's calculated firing solution. The target was on a 3rd-floor balcony. Webb began, his voice shaking slightly. Distance was 4,100 meters across an urban canyon. Wind at the firing line was 6 miles per hour from the northeast. I read the mirage across the flight path and calculated a temperature gradient of 0.9 degrees per 1,000 meters. Coriola's correction for the azimuth was 1.6 MOA. Riley studied the numbers. Everything looked correct based on the environmental data Webb had available. "I made the calculations exactly like you taught me," Webb continued. "Triple-checked everything. When I pulled the trigger, I was confident the shot was good, but it went left. Way left. Hit the building wall instead of the target. Did you feel any equipment issues? Scope malfunction? Rifle inconsistency? Anything?" Webb shook his head. Everything felt normal. The shot broke clean. There was no indication anything was wrong until the bullet impacted. Riley pulled up the mission timeline. The shot had been taken at 14:43 local time. She asked Webb about the urban environment, about building heights and materials, about any factors that might have affected the shot. And then she saw it. "The buildings," she said quietly, "what were they made of?" Webb looked confused. "Concrete mostly. Some had metal cladding." "Why?" Riley's mind raced. Metal cladding. On which side of the flight path? Webb pulled up a satellite image of the area and pointed. These 3 buildings on the south side had metal exteriors. Riley felt something click into place. "What time was it locally?" "Almost 1500 hours, mid-afternoon." "And the sun position?" Webb frowned, thinking. "It would have been southwest, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon." Riley pulled out her own laptop and began running calculations. Metal buildings in desert environments. Afternoon sun heating the metal surfaces. The heat radiating off those surfaces would create thermal columns rising along the building's faces. Those columns would create air currents that wouldn't be visible in mirage readings at ground level. "You didn't miss because your calculations were wrong," Riley said slowly. "You missed because there was a localized thermal effect from sun-heated metal buildings that you couldn't have predicted. The rising hot air along those buildings pushed your bullet left." Webb stared at her. "But how could I have known that?" "There's no way to calculate for building-specific thermal effects." "Exactly. This wasn't a failure of methodology. This was a failure of intelligence. Whoever planned this operation should have identified that environmental factor and either changed the firing position or scrubbed the mission. Naval Special Warfare doesn't see it that way." Webb said bitterly. They see a shooter who missed and got people killed. My career is over. I'll never work as a sniper again. Riley closed her laptop with more force than necessary. Not if I have anything to say about it. She spent the next 48 hours compiling a detailed report analyzing the Yemen mission. She calculated the thermal effects of metal buildings under desert sun conditions, demonstrated how those effects would create unpredictable air currents, and showed mathematically that Webb's shot should have been successful based on the environmental data available to him. Then she requested a meeting with the Naval Special Warfare Command Investigating Board. Commander Pritchard tried to talk her out of it. Riley, these are flag officers looking for blood. If you go in there defending Webb, they'll turn on you too. Then they turn on me. I'm not letting Webb take the fall for something that wasn't his fault. The investigation board consisted of 3 officers, all combat veterans, with decades of experience. The senior member was Rear Admiral Marcus Stone, a former SEAL who'd built his reputation on demanding accountability from everyone under his command. Riley stood before them in her dress uniform, the report she'd compiled sitting on the table between them. Admiral Stone spoke first. Petty Officer Voss, you are here to defend a shooter who missed a critical shot and compromised an operation. 2 of my men died because of that miss. What could you possibly say that would justify that failure? With respect, Admiral, your men died because the mission planning was inadequate. Petty Officer Webb executed his shot correctly based on available data. The miss occurred due to environmental factors that weren't identified during pre-mission intelligence gathering. One of the other board members, a captain named Reeves, leaned forward. Are you suggesting that our planning personnel failed? I'm suggesting that extreme-range shots in urban environments introduce variables that current planning protocols don't adequately address. Metal buildings creating thermal columns. Concrete canyons channeling wind in unexpected ways. These aren't factors that show up in standard meteorological data. Stone's expression hardened. So you're saying your methodology doesn't work in real-world conditions? I'm saying my methodology works within the parameters it was designed for. But no methodology can account for environmental factors that aren't visible to the shooter. That's not a training failure. That's an intelligence failure. The room went silent. Riley could feel the weight of their scrutiny, could sense that she'd just accused the planning staff of inadequacy in front of officers who took such accusations very seriously. Captain Reeves spoke again. You've examined the mission data. What should have been done differently? Riley opened her report. The firing position should have been moved to eliminate the thermal corridor created by the metal buildings. Alternatively, the shot should have been delayed until evening when solar heating was reduced. Or the mission should have been scrubbed in favor of a different approach entirely. What shouldn't have happened was sending a shooter into a situation with environmental factors that made success nearly impossible. Admiral Stone studied her for a long moment. You're putting your reputation on the line for someone who failed. Why Tom offered them on? Because Petty Officer Webb didn't fail, sir. The system failed him. I trained him to make shots based on observable environmental data. I didn't train him to predict invisible thermal effects from building materials because that's not something a shooter in position can calculate. That information needs to come from mission planning. The third board member, a commander named Phillips, spoke for the first time. If we accept your analysis, it means acknowledging that naval special warfare has sent men into an operation without adequate environmental assessment. That's a significant accusation. It's not an accusation, sir. It's a recommendation for improvement. Extreme-range urban shooting requires a level of environmental analysis that we're not currently providing to our shooters. If we want to employ these techniques operationally, we need to upgrade our planning protocols. Stone closed the folder in front of him. We'll take your report under consideration. Dismissed. Riley left the room feeling like she'd just painted a target on her own back. She'd essentially told 3 senior officers that their command had failed, that their planning staff wasn't adequate for the missions they were conducting. It was the kind of truth-telling that ended careers. Sarah called her that evening. I heard what you did at the investigation board. Are you insane? You just accused naval special warfare of incompetence to their faces? I accuse the planning process of being incomplete. There's a difference. Not to them, there isn't. Riley, you could have kept your head down, let Webb take the hit, and continued building your program. Instead, you stepped into the line of fire. Why wouldn't I? Riley thought about Captain Hale, about the lessons he taught her, about responsibility and integrity, and the difference between being competent and being right. Because 2 people died, and if we don't figure out why more people are going to die, I can't live with that. 3 days later, Admiral Stone requested a private meeting with Riley. She reported to his office, expecting to be reprimanded, maybe even facing administrative punishment for her testimony. Instead, Stone gestured for her to sit and pulled up her report on his computer. "I've had my planning staff review your analysis. They confirmed that the thermal effects you identified were real and measurable. They also confirmed that our current environmental assessment protocols don't account for building-specific thermal patterns in urban environments." Riley said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "You were right," Stone continued. "Our planning failed, Petty Officer Webb. We sent him into an impossible situation and then blamed him when he couldn't overcome factors he couldn't see. That's on us, not on him." The admission shocked Riley into silence. She'd expected defensiveness, bureaucratic covering, maybe grudging acknowledgement at best, not this direct acceptance of responsibility. "Webb's sniper qualification is being reinstated," Stone said. "He'll undergo additional urban environment training, but he's cleared to return to operational status." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. That's not something most junior officers have the courage to do." Stone paused, studying her, which brings me to why I really wanted to meet. "I'm establishing a new unit within Naval Special Warfare, Advanced Environmental Analysis for Precision Operations. I want you to lead it." Riley's mind stuttered. "Sir, your methodology works, but you're right that it requires environmental data our current planning doesn't provide. I want you to develop protocols for urban extreme range operations, train analysts to identify environmental factors that affect precision fire, and create a support structure for operational snipers that gives them the data they need to succeed. I'm an instructor, Admiral. I teach shooting, not operational planning. You're someone who understands the gap between what shooters can do and what we're asking them to do. That makes you exactly the right person for this." Stone's expression softened slightly. "Look, I've been in this community for 30 years. I've seen a lot of talented people, but I've rarely seen someone willing to risk their own career to protect someone else and improve the system at the same time. That's leadership, Petty Officer. And it's what this unit needs." Riley felt overwhelmed. Leading a new unit meant leaving instruction, meant stepping away from the direct teaching that had become her purpose. But it also meant addressing the systemic issues that had nearly destroyed Webb's career and had actually cost 2 lives. "When would this start?" she asked. "Immediately. You'll have 6 months to build the unit, develop the protocols, and train your first team of analysts. Then we'll test the system on actual operations." Riley thought about her current students, about the classes she'd committed to teach, about Sarah and Collins, and all the people at Coronado who'd become her community. But she also thought about Webb's hollow eyes, about 2 SEALs who'd died in Yemen, about all the future operations that would fail if the system didn't improve. "I'll do it," she said. The transition happened faster than Riley expected. Within 2 weeks, she'd been transferred from Coronado to a facility in Virginia Beach, given an office, a budget, and carte blanche to recruit whoever she needed. Her first hire was Webb. When she called to offer him the position, he was silent for so long, she thought the connection had dropped. "You want me," he finally said. "After what happened? You didn't fail in Yemen. You identified an environmental factor that the planning staff missed. That makes you exactly the kind of analyst this unit needs." Her second hire was Chen, who'd been one of her best students in Arizona. Her third was a meteorologist named Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in urban microclimates. Her fourth was a structural engineer who understood how building materials affected thermal patterns. Within 3 months, the Advanced Environmental Analysis Unit had grown to 12 people, split between analysts and field support personnel. They developed protocols for assessing urban environments, created databases of building materials and their thermal properties, and built predictive models for how different structures affected air currents at various times of day. The first operational test came in Somalia. A high-value target needed to be eliminated at 3,800 meters across an urban environment similar to the Yemen mission. Riley's team spent 72 hours analyzing satellite imagery, weather patterns, building materials, and solar angles. They identified 3 potential firing positions and calculated environmental effects for each one. The recommendation went to the SEAL team use position, Charlie, at 0600 hours, when thermal effects would be minimal. The shot would be challenging but achievable based on the environmental data. The team followed the recommendation. The shooter made the shot on the first attempt. The target was eliminated with no collateral damage, and the team extracted without incident. When the after-action report came back listing the operation as a complete success, Riley felt something shift inside her. This was what success looked like. Not just making impossible shots, but creating systems that allowed others to make those shots consistently and safely. Admiral Stone called personally to congratulate her. Your unit just saved lives and completed a mission that might have failed using old planning protocols. That's exactly what I hoped you'd accomplish. It's just one operation, sir. It's proof of concept, and it's going to change how we plan every extreme range operation from now on. Over the next 4 months, Riley's unit supported 7 more operations. 6 were successful. The 7th failed, but not because of environmental analysis. The target had moved unexpectedly during execution. The success rate caught the attention of other military organizations. The British SAS requested access to Riley's protocols. The Australian SASR asked for training. Even the CIA's Special Activities Division wanted to integrate her environmental analysis into their operations. Riley found herself briefing generals and admirals, explaining her methodologies to people who'd never fired a rifle but understood the strategic importance of what she'd developed. It was surreal going from the quiet woman dismissed in Arizona to someone whose work was shaping international special operations doctrine. But success brought scrutiny. A journalist somehow discovered the existence of Riley's unit and started asking questions about classified operations. The story wasn't published, military censors killed it, but it sparked a security review that put Riley under investigation for potential information leaks. She sat through hours of interrogation by Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents answering the same questions repeatedly. Had she discussed classified operations with unauthorized personnel? Had she shared sensitive environmental data outside secure channels? Had she been in contact with foreign intelligence services? The answer to all questions was no, but the investigation dragged on for weeks. Riley watched her unit's work slow to a crawl as her team members were pulled in for questioning as operational commanders became hesitant to use her services while she was under investigation. Sarah Chen called from Coronado. "This is political, Riley. Someone doesn't like that you're changing how things work and they're trying to take you down." Who would do that? Could be anyone. Commanders who feel threatened by new methodologies. Contractors who profit from current systems. Institutional resistance to change. Does it matter? What matters is fighting back. But Riley didn't know how to fight an invisible enemy. She continued her work, continued supporting operations, continued building her unit while the investigation circled like a vulture. The break came from an unexpected source. Admiral Stone personally intervened using his authority to accelerate the investigation and demand conclusions. Within 48 hours, NCIS closed the case with no findings of wrongdoing. Stone met with Riley afterward. "You've made enemies, petty officer. People who benefit from the old ways of doing things don't like being told those ways are inadequate. This investigation was the first attack. It won't be the last." What should I do? Keep proving them wrong, keep supporting operations successfully, keep saving lives. Eventually the results speak louder than the politics. He paused. "And maybe accept that promotion to Chief Petty Officer that's been sitting on your desk for the past month." Riley had been avoiding the promotion paperwork, uncomfortable with the attention and responsibility it represented. But Stone was right. If she wanted to protect her unit and continue improving the system, she needed the rank and authority that came with it. She signed the papers that evening. 3 weeks later, Riley received an encrypted message from a source she didn't recognize. The message contained a single line: Captain Hale's death wasn't an accident. Her blood went cold. She'd been told that Captain Hale died during a classified operation, that the details were sealed, that she didn't have clearance to know more. She'd accepted that explanation because she'd had no choice. Now someone was telling her it was a lie. Riley stared at the message for 3 hours, her mind racing through implications. If Hale's death wasn't accidental, it meant someone had killed him. If someone had killed him, there was a reason. If there was a reason, it might be connected to the same forces trying to undermine her work now. She thought about deleting the message, pretending she'd never seen it, focusing on her unit and her mission, and staying safely within the boundaries of what she was authorized to know. But Captain Hale had taught her that integrity meant pursuing truth even when it was dangerous, even when it was easier to look away. Riley hit reply and typed, "Tell me everything." The response came immediately, not via message. "Meet me tomorrow. 2200 hours. Coordinates attached." Riley checked the coordinates. a warehouse district in Norfolk, miles from any military installation. The kind of place where people met when they didn't want to be seen. She should report this. She should tell Admiral Stone or her commanding officer or NCIS. She should follow protocol and let the proper authorities investigate. Instead, she packed her sidearm and prepared to learn the truth about how Captain Hale really died. Riley arrived at the Norfolk warehouse 40 minutes early, circling the area twice to check for surveillance or ambush points. The district was abandoned, filled with buildings that had been empty since the last economic downturn. Perfect for a clandestine meeting, perfect for a trap. She parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, her sidearm concealed but accessible. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound made her hand move toward her weapon. This was stupid, meeting an unknown contact in an isolated location based on nothing but an encrypted message. But the mention of Captain Hale's death had stripped away her caution, replaced it with a need to know that overrode every rational consideration. At 21:55, a figure emerged from the warehouse entrance. Male, mid-40s, moving with the controlled economy of someone with extensive training. Riley's hand closed around her sidearm grip. "Petty Officer Voss," the man called out. "I'm unarmed, and I was a friend of Aiden Hale." The use of her rank and Hale's first name made Riley pause. This wasn't some random conspiracy theorist. This was someone with inside knowledge. She approached cautiously, keeping distance between them. "Who are you?" Chief Warrant Officer Michael Granger. "I served with Captain Hale on Task Force Nightfall. You wouldn't have heard of it because, officially, it never existed." Riley studied his face, looking for deception. She found only exhaustion and something that looked like grief. "Captain Hale never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have. Operational security. But he mentioned you constantly. Said you were the most naturally talented shooter he'd ever seen. Said you understood that precision wasn't just about mechanics, it was about philosophy." The words hit harder than Riley expected. She'd never known how Hale really felt about her abilities, had assumed his constant pushing meant he saw only her flaws and failures. "You said his death wasn't an accident," Riley said, forcing emotion down. "Explain." Granger glanced around the empty street before continuing. "Task Force Nightfall conducted operations that weren't sanctioned through normal channels. Black operations, deniable actions, the kind of work that doesn't show up in official records. Captain Hale was the best long-range elimination specialist in the program. He made shots that saved dozens of lives but could never be acknowledged. I know he did classified work. That doesn't explain why he's dead. 3 years ago, Hale was assigned a target in Syria. High-value individual coordinating attacks against U.S. forces. The shot required was 4,800 meters across a valley. Impossible by conventional standards, but Hale had developed methodologies that made it possible." Riley's breath caught. 4,800 meters. Even she had never attempted a shot at that range. "Hale took the shot and hit the target," Granger continued. "Mission successful, threat eliminated. But someone in the intelligence chain had fed us false information. The person Hale killed wasn't the enemy coordinator. It was a U.S. intelligence asset working deep cover. Someone we needed alive." The revelation made Riley's stomach turn. Captain Hale killed a friendly. He killed who he was told to kill, but the person who provided that intelligence knew exactly what they were doing. They used Hale to eliminate someone who'd become inconvenient, someone who knew too much about operations that certain people wanted buried. Who set him up?" Granger shook his head. "That's what Hale was trying to discover when he died. He knew the intelligence had been deliberately falsified. He started investigating, asking questions, pushing for answers. 6 weeks later, he's killed in what's officially listed as a training accident during a high-altitude insertion exercise." Riley felt rage building in her chest, hot and overwhelming. "You're saying someone murdered him to cover up the fact that they'd used him to commit assassination?" "I'm saying someone made sure Captain Hale couldn't expose what had really happened in Syria. And I'm saying that the same people who did that are now threatened by what you're accomplishing." "My unit, what does environmental analysis have to do with any of this?" Granger pulled out a tablet and showed Riley a series of documents. Mission reports, intelligence assessments, operational summaries. "Your methodologies work. They work so well that success rates for extreme range operations have increased 40% since you started supporting missions. That's creating a paper trail documentation of capabilities that certain people want to keep hidden. Riley scanned the documents, recognizing some of the operations her unit had supported. You're not making sense. Why would anyone want to hide operational success? Because success means scrutiny. It means congressional oversight asking how we suddenly got so good at extreme range elimination. It means journalists investigating. It means allies and enemies both trying to understand our capabilities. And that scrutiny might expose operations like the one that got Captain Hale killed. The pieces were clicking together now, forming a picture that made Riley sick. The NCIS investigation. That wasn't random. Someone was trying to discredit me, shut down my unit before it created too much attention. Admiral Stone stopped that investigation, but he can't stop what's coming next. There are people in the intelligence community who will do anything to keep their operations hidden. They've already killed to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to do it again. Riley's hand moved to her sidearm. Is that a threat? It's a warning you're following the same path Captain Hale did. Asking questions, pushing boundaries, creating documentation of capabilities that powerful people want to deny exist. If you keep going, you'll end up the same way he did. Then what am I supposed to do? Shut down my unit, stop supporting operations, let people die because I'm afraid of making enemies. Granger's expression softened. I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you to be careful. Captain Hale wasn't careful enough. He trusted the system, believed that doing the right thing would protect him. It didn't. Riley felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Why are you telling me this? If it's so dangerous, why risk meeting me? Because Aiden Hale was my friend and I owe it to him to make sure his student doesn't make the same mistakes he did. And because someone needs to expose what happened. I don't have the credibility or the position to do it. But you do. You want me to investigate Captain Hale's death. I want you to survive long enough to accomplish what he couldn't. The truth about Syria, about the false intelligence, about who's been running unauthorized operations through naval special warfare. All of it's connected, and all of it's dangerous. Riley stood there in the empty street processing everything Granger had told her. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as paranoid conspiracy theory, but another part recognized the truth in his words, understood that the forces trying to undermine her work were more than just institutional resistance to change. I need proof, she said finally, not just your word. Hard evidence that I can take to someone who will actually investigate. Granger handed her a flash drive. Everything I have is on here, mission reports from Syria, communications logs showing the false intelligence chain, financial records suggesting who benefited from eliminating that intelligence asset. It's not complete, but it's a start. Riley took the drive, feeling its weight in her palm like a live grenade. If I pursue this, I'm putting a target on my back. The target's already there. You just didn't know it until now. Granger melted back into the shadows before Riley could ask more questions, leaving her alone with the flash drive and more questions than answers. She drove back to her apartment, in a daze, her mind cycling through scenarios and implications. At 0300, unable to sleep, she loaded the flash drive contents onto an encrypted laptop. What she found made her hands shake. Mission reports from operations she'd never heard of. Intelligence assessments that contradicted official narratives, financial transfers between defense contractors and offshore accounts, communications between senior officers discussing operations that sounded more like assassinations than military actions. And buried in the files, a series of emails between Captain Hale and an intelligence officer named Deputy Director Marcus Crane. Hale asking questions about the Syria mission. Crane deflecting, dismissing, eventually threatening. The final email from Hale was dated 2 days before his death. I know what you did. I have proof. This ends now. Riley sat back from the laptop, her mind reeling. Crane had killed Captain Hale or arranged his death. The evidence wasn't conclusive enough for a criminal prosecution, but it was damning enough to understand what had happened. Her phone rang at 0530. Admiral Stone's voice came through, harsh and urgent. Riley, we have a situation. I need you at NavSpecWar headquarters in 1 hour. Don't ask questions, just get here. She arrived to find Stone's office filled with senior officers, all looking grim. Stone gestured her inside and closed the door. Deputy Director Crane from the Defense Intelligence Agency is launching an investigation into your unit, Stone said without preamble. He's alleging security violations, unauthorized disclosure of classified methodologies, and potential compromise of ongoing operations. Riley felt ice settle in her stomach. Crane was making his move, trying to destroy her before she could expose him. The allegations are false, sir. I know they're false, but Crane has political connections that make him untouchable through normal channels. He's going to dismantle your unit, discredit everything you have accomplished, and probably end your career in the process. Stone paused. Unless you give me a reason to fight him. Something that justifies burning every favor I have and making very powerful people very angry. Riley thought about the flash drive in her pocket, about the evidence Granger had provided, about Captain Hale and what he'd tried to accomplish before they killed him for it. She pulled out the drive and placed it on Stone's desk. Captain Aiden Hale was murdered to cover up an unauthorized assassination operation run through Naval Special Warfare. Deputy Director Crane provided false intelligence that resulted in the death of a U.S. intelligence asset. When Captain Hale discovered the truth, Crane arranged his death and made it look like a training accident. Everything's on this drive. The room went absolutely silent. Stone stared at the drive like it might explode. Do you understand what you're alleging? He said quietly. You're accusing a senior intelligence official of murder and conspiracy. If you're wrong, your career is over. If you're right, you've just started a war with people who kill to protect their secrets. I know, sir, but Captain Hale tried to expose this and died for it. I owe it to him to finish what he started. Stone picked up the drive, examining it. I'll need to verify this information through back channels. If it checks out, I'll take it to the Inspector General and the Senate Intelligence Committee. But Riley, you need to understand that the moment I do that, you become a target. Crane and whoever's protecting him will do everything they can to discredit you, destroy you, maybe even kill you. They're already trying to destroy my unit, sir. At least this way I'm fighting back. Stone nodded slowly. Give me 72 hours to confirm the data and line up support. In the meantime, business as usual. Don't let anyone know what you've provided. Don't change your routine. Act like nothing's happened. Riley left the meeting feeling like she just stepped off a cliff into darkness. She went through the motions of her day, briefing her team, supporting ongoing operations, pretending everything was normal. But inside, she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It took 48 hours. Riley was in her office reviewing environmental data for an operation in Iraq when Webb burst through the door, his face pale. Chief, we have a problem. Someone just leaked classified information about our unit to the media. Operational details, methodology, specifics, everything. Riley felt her blood run cold. Who leaked it? The story claims you did. Says you've been sharing classified data with unauthorized personnel, compromising national security for personal gain. The setup was perfect. Crane had manufactured evidence of the exact crime he was accusing her of, creating a narrative that would destroy her credibility before she could expose him. Her phone rang. Stone's voice was tight with anger. Riley and CIS is on their way to arrest you. Someone planted classified documents on your personal computer with metadata showing you accessed and transmitted them. I'm trying to delay the arrest, but you need to disappear. Now. Sir, I know you didn't, but Crane's made sure the evidence says otherwise. If NCIS takes you into custody, you'll be locked up pending trial. Your testimony about Syria becomes the ravings of a disgraced officer facing espionage charges. We lose any chance of exposing what really happened. Riley's mind raced. Running would make her look guilty, but staying meant letting Crane win, meant Captain Hale's death would never be avenged, meant the corruption would continue. Where do I go? I'm sending coordinates to your secure phone. My people will meet you there and keep you safe while I work the political angle. But Riley, once you run, there's no coming back until we prove your innocence. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built, it's all on hold until this resolves. Riley looked around her office at the photos of successful operations on the wall, at the commendation she'd earned at the unit patch representing everything she'd accomplished. Then she grabbed her go bag and left it all behind. The safe house was in the Blue Ridge Mountains, isolated and secure. Riley spent 3 days there while Stone worked his contacts building a coalition of support. The evidence from Granger's flash drive checked out every document authentic, every allegation verifiable. Stone took it to the Senate Intelligence Committee's chairman, who authorized a classified investigation into Crane's activities. But investigations took time and Crane wasn't waiting. The media stories about Riley intensified. Her photo appeared on news broadcasts labeled as a traitor who'd compromised national security. Former colleagues were interviewed, taken out of context, made to sound like they'd always suspected she was unreliable. Webb called her secure phone on the fourth day. "Chief, they arrested me, claiming I was your accomplice. Sarah Chen's under investigation too. They're dismantling the entire unit, arresting anyone who worked closely with you." Riley felt rage and helplessness warring in her chest. "I'm sorry, I never meant to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I'm here because you saved my career once and because what we're doing matters. I'm not giving up just because some corrupt bureaucrat is trying to bury the truth." The investigation broke open on day 7. A senator on the Intelligence Committee went public with allegations against Crane, citing classified evidence of unauthorized operations and potential involvement in Captain Hale's death. The media attention shifted from Riley to Crane overnight. Crane responded by doubling down, claiming the investigation was politically motivated, that Riley had manipulated evidence, that the whole thing was a conspiracy to undermine national security operations. It might have worked if Granger hadn't come forward. He testified before the Senate committee in closed session, providing first-hand accounts of the false intelligence chain, naming names, exposing the network of officers and officials who'd been running unauthorized operations through naval special warfare. The scandal exploded. Crane was suspended pending criminal investigation. 3 other senior officials were placed on administrative leave. The media went from calling Riley a traitor to calling her a whistleblower who'd exposed massive corruption. Riley returned to Virginia Beach 2 weeks after fleeing. The charges against her had been dropped, the manufactured evidence exposed as a frame job. Webb and Sarah were released and cleared of all allegations. Admiral Stone had personally overseen the restoration of her security clearances and the reinstatement of her unit. But the victory felt hollow. Captain Hale was still dead. The people who'd killed him were facing justice, but that wouldn't bring him back. And Riley's unit, her purpose, the work she'd built, her life around all of it, had been tainted by the scandal, would always carry the shadow of what had happened. Stone met her at Nav Spec War headquarters the day she returned. "The Senate wants you to testify publicly. Tell your story, explain what you discovered. Help them understand the scope of the corruption." "I'm a sniper, sir, not a politician." "You're a lot more than a sniper, Riley. You're someone who stood up to power and won." People need to see that integrity still matters, that doing the right thing isn't always the path to ruin. Riley testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee 3 weeks later. She told them about Captain Hale, about his dedication and his sacrifice. She told them about the false intelligence operation in Syria, about how good people had been used as tools by corrupt officials. She told them about her unit's work, about how they'd been targeted for creating documentation that threatened hidden operations. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Senators from both parties praised her courage. The media called her a hero. Foreign allies requested copies of her testimony to review their own intelligence protocols. Riley sat through it all, feeling disconnected, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The praise felt empty. The recognition felt unearned. All she'd done was finish what Captain Hale had started, and it had cost her almost everything. 6 months later, Riley stood in front of a new class of students at Coronado. Her unit had been rebuilt, her methodologies officially adopted not just by the Navy, but by Joint Special Operations Forces across all services. Webb was her second in command. Sarah had returned as lead instructor. Everything was supposed to be back to normal. But it wasn't. It would never be. She'd seen too much, understood too well how easily good systems could be corrupted by bad actors, how doing the right thing could turn your life upside down. She looked at the 20 faces watching her expectantly, waiting to learn the secrets of impossible shots and extreme range precision. "My name is Chief Petty Officer Riley Voss," she began. "For the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you to make shots you currently think are impossible. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you why those shots matter, why precision matters, why integrity matters, why doing the work right even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when people don't understand or appreciate it, why that matters most of all." She paused, thinking about her father in the Montana wilderness, about Captain Hale's relentless standards, about Maddox's initial contempt transforming into respect, about Webb's redemption and Crane's fall. "The rifle doesn't care about your feelings," she continued, echoing words Captain Hale had spoken to her years ago. "The bullet doesn't care if you're tired or frustrated or scared. It follows the laws of physics with absolute consistency. Your job is to understand those laws better than anyone else alive. But more than that, your job is to understand that every shot you take carries responsibility. To your team, to your mission, to the people you're protecting, and to yourself. One of the students raised his hand. Chief, is it true you exposed a major intelligence conspiracy that you went up against senior officials and won? Riley considered how to answer. The truth was complicated, messy, filled with gray areas and uncertain outcomes. But these students didn't need complexity. They needed clarity. I exposed people who'd forgotten that their power came with responsibility, she said. People who thought being clever was more important than being right. And yes, there were consequences. But the alternative was letting corruption continue, letting good people die for bad reasons, letting the mission we're all supposed to serve become compromised by personal agendas. She looked at each student in turn. Some of you will face similar choices in your careers. Moments when doing the right thing conflicts with doing the easy thing. When speaking truth threatens your advancement. When protecting others puts you at risk. In those moments, remember that your integrity is the only thing truly worth protecting, because once you compromise, everything else you accomplish becomes hollow. The students absorbed her words with varying degrees of understanding. Some got it immediately. Others would need time and experience to appreciate what she was telling them. That was fine. Riley had learned that teaching wasn't about making everyone understand everything immediately. It was about planting seeds that would grow when the time was right. As the class filed out for their first range session, Riley remained behind, staring at the empty classroom. Sarah appeared in the doorway. You did good in there. Captain Hale would be proud. Riley felt emotion rising in her throat but pushed it down. I just hope I'm teaching them the right things, not just how to shoot, but why it matters. You are. And they'll carry that forward, teach their own students, someday keep the tradition alive. Sarah paused. That's how we honor the people we've lost. Not by mourning forever, but by making sure their lessons survive. Riley nodded, unable to speak. She thought about Captain Hale's grave at Arlington, about the classified medal that acknowledged his service without revealing its true nature, about the legacy he'd left that lived on in her and in everyone she taught. She thought about Maddox learning humility, about Webb finding redemption, about Collins transforming from skeptic to believer, about Stone risking his career to protect what was right. Most of all, she thought about the mission, the endless work of training warriors, supporting operations, saving lives through precision and discipline and relentless dedication to excellence. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't always appreciated, but it mattered, and that was enough. Riley picked up her gear and headed toward the range where her students were waiting. She had work to do, shots to make, lessons to teach. The legacy Captain Hale had left her wasn't about vengeance or vindication or even victory. It was about the simple, profound act of doing the work right every single day, regardless of who was watching or what it cost. That was the shot that mattered most, and Riley Voss never missed.